Good morning. How's it going? Freezing or warm enough? Warm enough, good. So I'm wondering if there's anyone here that is here for the first time. Okay, hi. So welcome to Chemrezik Institute. My name is Kartsön or Yaki. Normally on the Sunday morning sessions, we have Geshe Tsultrim, the resident teacher at the center that is leading the Sunday morning sessions. But today is his last day in self-isolation, having contracted COVID-19. So I'm stepping in order to lead the session instead of Geshe, and hopefully it will be with us. He'll be back next week. And so in the last few months, we've been studying a text that is called Mind Training Like the Rays of the Sun, which teaches the way to make our mind the best it can be. Developing the potential of our mind, ways of eliminating faults, negative traits, and developing perfect qualities to our mind. So we've been having discussions about different methods, different practices that can be used in order to make our mind better. So we've covered the first section of the text that explains methods for developing love and compassion, the altruistic mind of enlightenment, how to then use those practices and incorporate them in our daily life, and sets of instructions or guidelines that we can use for our daily life. And then we started to look at the second section of the text that explains the way to develop wisdom. And the presentation of this text is quite complicated. It's very compact. Language is very difficult. I found it also difficult. So we read a few pages from that presentation, and I thought of what we can do today, maybe, or what I can do today, maybe it's just to speak about this topic in general, to look at the essential points in the section of wisdom. And through that, we can also speak about the Buddhist idea of wisdom, what kind of wisdom we want to develop. And so I will try to make it clear, not too complicated. But before we get to that, we normally start our session with correcting our motivation with refuge and bodhicitta. So for those of you who are new to that, we want to, for us as Buddhists, the entry gate to the teachings of the Buddha is a sense of reliance upon the Buddha as the teacher, the teachings of the Buddha, and the community of Sangha, spiritual teachers that mediate the teachings of the Buddha to us. And we want to use that in order to develop our mind to become perfect, to be a mind of Buddha, so that we ourselves could become Buddhas and embody the teachings of the Buddha in our own mind, and thereby also be able to help others if they have any interest or inclination to develop the mind in a similar fashion. And so we take refuge, or we rely upon the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, and we also then try to develop an altruistic intention, the wish for ourselves to become Buddhas in order to be of benefit to others. So this attitude of wanting to become Buddha, to be of maximum benefit to others, is called in this tradition bodhicitta. So we normally start sessions with refuge and bodhicitta. Now, if you're not used to that, or you don't feel like you don't feel comfortable doing that, just kind of think that today I want to learn something that will be of use to me, hopefully, so that I could develop my mind to make it better. Might be able to use it for my own benefit, and might be able to use it for the benefit of others. And if I can, at least
start the video.
Well, yeah, right. Yeah.
Got it.
You don't get a car.
Allows them to take pictures.
You would think that you have a car.
there you go. May I be able to may I be able to develop my mind at least so that I will have I will be of lesser harm to myself and lesser harm to others. So this is the way that we normally correct the motivation, but maybe we can start with, first of all, a few seconds of just quieting our mind. So if it helps, you can slightly close your eyes. We'll do just a brief meditation of 1 or 2 minutes, trying to settle our mind. We can take 2 or 3 deep breaths in thinking that we are withdrawing our mind from the outside world to the inside. And then turning our attention to the breath. Just a way of anchoring our mind and trying to bring some stability to our mind. We're going to count a round of 7 breaths. Breathing out and breathing in is 1 breath, and we're going to do it 7 times, just as a way of centering our mind. And then at the beginning, as a way of correcting our motivation, we can think that we're surrounded by other living beings, not only other human beings, but everything, everywhere around us is teeming with life. And we as people, as human beings, and also other living beings, work and operate with a very basic impulse to be well, to be safe, to be comfortable. Try to find happiness and satisfaction, serenity, to be protected from fear and anxiety and danger and suffering, disappointment, sense of malaise or discomfort. So whatever we do directly or indirectly every day, throughout all hours of the day, is based on seeking happiness and well-being and wanting to avoid pain or danger. All living beings around us, ourselves, our family members, our friends, acquaintances, people that we know far and near, all of us are exactly the same in seeking happiness and well-being. So we can think that they're not different to me, even though I don't know what's happening to them in their mind. I don't know for sure what feelings do they have. Still, I can identify based upon my own personal experience with a basic wish for comfort, for pleasure, for acceptance, for satisfaction, for peace, and wanting to avoid pain and danger. And if there is a way that I can make my mind better, to avoid harming myself and harming others, and to be of more benefit to myself and others, as we have the same goals of happiness and well-being, I want to do that as much as I can. Ultimately, if I were to become Buddha with perfect knowledge, wisdom, compassion, and ability, I'd be able to be of maximum benefit to many other living beings. So we think that for the bottom of our heart, we take a safe direction. We take refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. So in reciting the verse for refuge and bodhicitta, for those of you who feel comfortable enough to recite this verse, you're welcome to join us. And if for the time being you don't feel comfortable, just think that I want to make my mind as positive as I can, best as I can, with more love, compassion, wisdom. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dhamma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dhamma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dhamma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. All right. So, as I said, I wanted to have a quick review, a brief review over an hour or so of the aspect of wisdom found in the Buddha's teachings. So as we're looking at mind training like the rays of the sun, the last part of the text is teaching the way to develop what is called the ultimate mind of enlightenment, ultimate bodhicitta. Ultimate mind of enlightenment, ultimate bodhicitta is a consciousness, a mind that has a direct insight into reality, the most subtle level of reality. And the reason that we want to develop the ultimate mind of enlightenment has to do with recognizing negative traits that we have currently operating in our mind. In Buddhist terminology, we call them either disturbing emotions or afflictive states of mind. And we're quite familiar with the negative traits that we have in our mind. So we have anger, hostility, aggression, resentment, not all the time, but from time to time. But on top of that, we have sense of attachment that causes discomfort in our mind. Sometimes when attachment grows very strong, it feels like we're so thirsty, as if there's an ocean of water, it'd still not be enough in order to quench that thirst of attachment. And on top of that, we have jealousy and pride and many other afflictive states of mind that operate in our mind, which first of all create a certain sense of disturbance. We all have an acquaintance with anger, for example, or with sense of aggression or hostility. And we know that when that arises, it creates this tension or pain in our mind. And if we had a choice in general, whether to become angry or not to have anger ever again, I think that all of us would have opted for not having anger ever again. But inevitably anger arises, and also attachment arises, pride, jealousy, and so forth. So all those states of mind cause us to perform actions, what we call karma. So we take actions based upon those motivational forces, anger, attachment, and so forth. We take actions. And not only they result sometimes in uncomfortable or painful situations in this life, from a Buddhist perspective, we also believe that they leave imprints upon a mind stream. We go on and take another rebirth, and those imprints pretty much determine the way that we behave also in future lifetimes. So if we grow accustomed to anger, and we are accustomed to anger in one way or another, or to different degrees, then we will also be prone to becoming angry in future lives. And a similar thing can be said also with respect to attachment and jealousy and pride and so forth. So not only we still go on, continue to develop those habits from previous lifetime to this lifetime to future lifetimes, but they also cause us to behave in a certain way that creates problems and suffering for us. So the very root of this process is ignorance with respect to reality. So from a Buddhist perspective, if we want to rid ourselves of all the different problems and difficulties that we face in our daily life, we have to deal with our mind. We have to eliminate our disturbing emotions. If we eliminate our disturbing emotions, we will also stop behaving in a way that is detrimental to ourselves and others. If we want to eliminate our disturbing emotions or afflictions, we have to eliminate ignorance with respect to reality. So ignorance is the very foundation. This is what we need to eliminate in order to break free from this cycle of birth and death, which is controlled by anger, attachment, and ignorance. And so the last section of the text explains what we need to do in order to eliminate ignorance. And I had a look. I had a look yesterday at the last section of the text and pulled out what I thought were the most important points in the last section of the text that explains the way to eliminate ignorance. Sorry. All right. Try to. It's not very big, is it? Can you see it? What happens? All right. No way. Technology jinxed me. All right. So the first point in the section in the text is recognizing what ignorance is. Recognizing what ignorance is. And so first of all, we look at the Buddhist understanding of what ignorance is, and I prepared a chart for that. There are two types of ignorance: ignorance of unknowingness and ignorance of erroneous apprehension. So let's look at that. Ignorance of unknowingness is simply not knowing things. I don't know Russian, I don't know Japanese, I don't know how to cook a delicious Spanish meal. I have many things that I do not know, and you can say that kind of this is one part of ignorance. But simply not knowing something is not the very foundation of anger, attachment, and so forth. The very foundation of anger, attachment, and so forth is a misapprehension of reality, a distortion that we have with respect to reality. Sorry. And so the different levels of distortions that we have with respect to reality. There are coarse level of distortions and subtle level of distortion. So let's first of all look at coarse levels of distortion that we have with respect to reality operating in our mind. We believe that reality is one thing, but in an actual fact is something else. So from a Buddhist perspective, looking at erroneous apprehension, coarse level of reality, there are examples that are found in traditional texts of coarse distortions of reality, such as, for example, grasping at what is unclear or unclean as clean. Like, for example, we have an idea that there is something that is really nice and perfect in our body. What we normally think of is only the external layer, right? So the skin, the facial feature, the hair. We don't really think of what's happening underneath the skin. So we have an idea that if only we develop kind of this body that we have, the skin that we have, the muscles that we have, it will become beautiful and pure and pristine and clean, without really thinking that actually there's nothing inside the body. There's nothing that we can do in order to make it beautiful and clean. Sorry? We can do a lot. Well, we can probably detox. We can detox, you can get rid of quite a lot of things, but kind of the makeup of the body is not really enchanting. I mean, I guess that if you step into an operating theater and look at an operation, I would probably faint. Like, you know, I think that, and particularly when we think of just the biological mechanism of things, you know, food coming into the body and then leaving the body, it's not very enchanting. I think those are the things that we prefer not to think of or not to look at on a daily basis. So one erroneous apprehension that we sometimes speak of from a Buddhist perspective is taking what is not really clean to be nice and clean and pristine. And particularly, we can see that as a motivating force in the attachment that we have to others. We have desires, sexual desires, or intimate desire. We have an idea that there's something really beautiful and clean and pure in another person. And only if we had a relationship with that person, we'd be able to have happiness and pleasure. And of course, we have happiness and pleasure when we have relationships with others, but there's this overall this sense of confusion that there's something really clean, pure, absolutely beautiful in either ourselves or others, without being able to also see things which are actually not in the nature of being very clean. So that's one example. Another example is taking what is impermanent to be permanent and unchanging. Like, for example, every once in a while when I look at the mirror, and I think I said it before, kind of I get shocked of how different I am or I look comparing to a few years ago. You know, I have that expectation that my body will remain unchanging, that my appearance would be unchanging. The idea of myself is that I'm the same person as I was many years ago, maybe my youth or 20s or 30s and so forth. And also there's this notion of feeling as if I have a lot of time ahead of me, as if, no, I don't think that I will live forever. I don't think that I will never die. But it seems that there is some permanence and stability to this life, as if there is an ocean of time still waiting for me in this life. So the reality of our life, of our body to begin with, is that it's changing from moment to moment. And it is getting closer and closer every second that passes to the moment of death without being able to pause this process. And so we adhere, we cling to what is in fact changing from moment to moment, disintegrating from moment to moment, as if there's some stability and permanence within that. And because of that, we make plans for remaining for a very long time in this life. So our priorities are pretty much underpinned by this idea that we have a lot of time left for us in this life. And if we have a lot of time left for us, we need a lot of resources. We need a lot of things that will prevent us, that will give us comfort. We need a lot of things that will give us happiness and well-being. So kind of we spend a lot of time accumulating resources and possessions or things that we think that are going to give us pleasure, in kind of thinking that there is a lot of stability and permanence in this life. And also, not only with respect to ourselves, also with respect to others, other people. You know, we become, when someone that is close to our heart gets sick or passes away, most of the time we find ourselves completely unprepared. Most of the time we are unwilling to deal with situations when someone close to our heart is passing away, or when they get sick, or when unfortunate things befall upon them. We get anxious when things that belong to us fall apart. In still ascribing some form of permanence and stability, imputing or projecting some form of stability and permanence onto those things. And so the second level of, or this a second type of misapprehension, which causes us problems, disappointments, anger, anxiety, and so forth, is taking what is impermanent to be enduring, to be permanent, to be stable. And there are many other such misapprehensions of reality. Like, for example, I thought this morning that we can probably say that racism is also a type of misapprehension. We ascribe qualities to a particular group of people or to a particular group of living being something that a mind makes up, which is not necessarily in line with reality. And so this is one level of ignorance, of misapprehension. Let's look at the chart again. And so we have grasping at what is unclear or unclean is clean, grasping at the impermanent is permanent, grasping at suffering as happiness. From a Buddhist perspective, when we look at the different type of sufferings that we experience, there are things which are quite obvious to us. Painful sensations are what we call suffering. We experience physical painful sensations, but also mental pain, mental agony, the pain of losing something that is dear to us, the pain of disappointment, the pain of fear, the pain of hopelessness, and so forth. There are many types of mental unhappiness that we experience, but this is a really coarse level of suffering that the Buddha spoke of. The most subtle level of sufferings that the Buddha spoke of, like, for example, the suffering of change. That's another level of suffering that the Buddha spoke of, the suffering of change. And a description of suffering of change that is often given is the pleasant sensations that we experience, which is really it's something that can really do your head in. So we're looking for pleasure. We're looking for happiness. And we have the idea that things out there can give us happiness and pleasure, and we get them. And we experience pleasure or happiness, comfort for the time being. So this pleasant sensation that we feel, like, for example, we might have a delicious piece of cake, and there is that enjoyment that comes with a delicious piece of cake. So that pleasant sensation, happiness, physical pleasure, and mental elation that we get from just a piece of cake is something that the Buddha called suffering of change. And it says that we think that this is genuine happiness, genuine pleasure. There is pleasure in that, but it lasts for a very long time, and then it ends up in disappointment, or it ends up in suffering. I mean, if we just become dissatisfied and that would be about it, then you could say that it's not that bad. But often it also ends up in experiencing pain or suffering. So I mentioned it a few times about sometimes overeating, binge eating. There's something that gives you pleasure. I remember kind of some family gathering that I had many years ago, which there was an abundance of food. Food was abundant, food was delicious, then kind of kept on eating and eating and eating, not knowing when to stop. So there is that really nice, pleasant sensation that you get when you have delicious food. But then later on, kind of you cannot find comfortable sleep, you're kind of sweating at night, you're turning from one side to the next, it just becomes completely uncomfortable. So the Buddha said that the second level of suffering, suffering of change, is about those pleasant sensations that last for a very long time. And we chase after those pleasant sensations. We think that they will give us happiness and well-being, without thinking that at some point, the pleasant sensation, sooner rather than later, it will go away, will become again dissatisfied. And in a worst case scenario, that it will become painful. So another level of misapprehension of reality is taking what is in the nature of suffering or in the nature of dissatisfaction to be happiness. In fact, we can think that in this life, we can see how in this life, most of the things that we chase after are things that we think are going to give us happiness and well-being, genuine happiness and well-being. But in fact, most of those things come under the banner of suffering, of change. It doesn't make them evil or inherently bad, but it's just good to recognize that within those things, the nature of those things is to at some point become not satisfactory anymore. And then in some point, there could also be pain involved with those things. So there's a greater level of happiness and well-being, the Buddha said, that we can look for rather than just focusing mainly on suffering of change. There are some other levels of suffering, even more deeper level of suffering that the Buddha spoke of. Like, for example, the third level of suffering, which is called pervasive suffering of conditionality. So pervasive suffering of conditionality can be illustrated, for example, by the body itself. So the body is not a sensation. We call it suffering, but it's not a sensation. But it's that thing. Not all of us have a body. We know kind of what a body is. But as soon as we have a body such as this, it is inevitable that we will go through sickness, through aging, through death, and also through many other types of sufferings. Like, for example, coming across again and again with things that cause us displeasure, and having to be separated from things that cause us pleasure, and looking for something and not being able to find it. So there are many different types of sufferings that are, you can say, built into that physical mechanism, and we have no say, we have no choice. You know, even if we don't want to go through those experiences, we have to go through those experiences because we have a body such as this. And often we think of this body as also something that is quite good, something that is quite pleasant, not only our body, but also the bodies of others. We think that often there is something perfect and nice and beautiful in our body, the bodies of others. And again, it's not that there's something that is inherently bad and negative in the body. It's not that kind of we despise the body, but we want to become more realistic about our body, our feelings, our sensations, and that there's not that everything is perfect and beautiful and rosy about them. They also contain a lot of problems. So taking what is unclean as clean, taking what is impermanent to be permanent, taking what is in the nature of suffering to be happiness and pleasure, is distortion of reality. So there are tools within the Buddhist tradition that we can use, mental tools, things that we can practice in order to acquaint the mind with those levels of reality, to have a more realistic understanding of what we are, how we operate, what is a physical and mental makeup. And if we develop that understanding, the way that we interact with ourselves and with reality would be more balanced, and therefore there would be more, I think, satisfaction that we will experience on a daily basis, on a day-to-day basis. Our expectations would be more realistic. The way that we will relate not only to ourselves, but also to others would be more realistic. Our relationship with ourselves and others would be much better. So there's quite a lot of room for improvement, for mental prosperity, if we understand those levels of reality. So we've been speaking about ignorance. Let's look again at this chart. So there is this ignorance of erroneous apprehension. We have distortion of realities. We spoke of course levels of reality. But then from a Buddhist perspective, and also the topic of the chapter that we've been covering with Geshe-la in the last few weeks, is more focused on ignorance of grasping at the self. This is more complicated, but it's also interesting. And so all our disturbing emotions, all of our confusion with respect to reality is based on ignorance of grasping at the self. And what it means is that we have a distorted consciousness that believes that things exist independently, in and of themselves. There are different words and terms that we use in the Buddhist tradition that highlight different aspects of this ignorance, that believes that things exist in and of themselves independently from the onside. And each one of those terms highlights, as I was wanting to say, a certain aspect of that apprehension. And from a Buddhist perspective, this belief that things exist independently, objectively, and so forth is the very foundation of all of our afflictive states of mind. And in order to explain what it is in a really rough way, then we can think of the way that we appear to ourselves or other people appear to our mind. When we look at, for example, the people in this room, or at least also the people at home, you can think of yourself and the people around you. Whenever we see someone else, there is an appearance of that person as if they exist independently as they are, in and of themselves, without your mind seeing them in a particular way. So when I look at Ruby or Yeshe and so forth, they appear to my mind as if there is a person out there that exists independently from the mind that sees them as a person, as if I've never seen that person before, if no one would have seen that person before, they would still be who they are without a mind that sees them in a particular way. So as if there is a core of being, a core of person that exists independently without depending upon anything else, without depending upon cause and conditions, without depending upon parts, without depending upon the body and mind. They exist just as who they are inherently by their own nature. So this is what the Buddha called ignorance of grasping at the self. So in fact, everything that appears to our consciousnesses, to our physical consciousnesses and mental consciousness, currently appears as if it exists independently, as if each and everything has a core essence that defines it as what it is, without being dependent on or related to anything else. And what is set up when we start to investigate the nature of things, ourselves, other people, other living beings, not only ourselves and other living beings, but also everything that we use, we can see that there's nothing, no essence, no core that can be found that makes things what they are. So a common analogy or example that is given in teaching is, for example, looking at a flower. So we have a flower here. And when we try to think of what makes this flower as flower, if we look for the flower within the different parts of this flower, whether we'd be able to find any flowerness within it, then we can check whether the flower is in the petals. So no, we can pluck each one of those petals. I don't want to do it because it's quite a beautiful flower. But no, if I check whether the flower can be found in this petal, or this petal, or this one, whether it can be found in the center, is that an anther? Anther? Stem. Is that a stem or is that a stem? Stamen. Thank you. Whether it's found in the stamen, whether it's found in the stem, whether it's found in the leaves, we'll not be able to find the flower within each one of those components. And still, when I point at this thing, this is a flower. It's a flower, but if I look for an essence of flower, the core of flower, what makes it a flower, if I look for it within all those different components, I will not be able to find it. And similarly, when we look at kind of more relevant examples or relevant illustrations, we can think of ourselves and we can think of others. So we have a certain idea of ourselves. First of all, we identify, we go by a certain name. Now, we were given a name when we were younger. Some of us, by the way, when we become ordained, then we get another name. So it takes some time to get used to your new name. So we have a name, we identify with it, and our identity is based, kind of is interlinked with the name or the label that we got. We most of the time identify with our gender. We identify with our physical traits or with certain mental traits. So we think of ourselves, for example, as I'm a happy person, I'm a bubbly person, I'm kind of a moody person, I'm an angry person, I'm this person or the other person, I'm fat, I'm thin, I'm beautiful, I'm not beautiful, I'm clumsy, I'm not clumsy. We identify with certain features of our body and mind. And also, and often when we think of ourselves, it seems that there is this person, there's a core of that person that makes them who they are. And it has always been there. It has always been the same. It is always the same. It is unchanging. It is not dependent upon anything else, but it is what makes us who we are. So when we think of each and every one of us, when we think of ourselves and try and think, can I identify that essence of myself, who I am in actuality, in reality? What makes me be that person? Can we find anything in our physical and mental makeup? So as human beings, for example, we have a body and mind. If I were to try to look for an essence of myself, that would be the thing that would make me, no, my name is Kartsön or Yaki, the thing that makes Kartsön be who they are. The real person, I will have to look here within this package of body and mind. It would be kind of senseless to look for that real essence of myself somewhere else. I cannot find it, for example, over there. I cannot find it back at home. It's not something that I left in my car. It's not something that I find here within this computer. If I have to look for this essence of myself that is who I am in actuality, it will have to be either within the body, somewhere here, or within my mind. And so we have this firm identity that is based upon our body and mind, but when we look for it within the body and mind, can we find it? Like, for example, if I think of, and often it is said that in order to conduct this investigation, it's good to think of an extreme situation when there's this strong sense of I that arises in our mind. Like, for example, when you're frightened. So if you, for example, think of being chased by a scary dog, by a rabid dog, or falling from a cliff, or, for example, sitting somewhere and someone is blaming you for stealing something from them, and you're kind of publicly humiliated. So there's kind of, in all those different occasions, there's this strong sense of I or me that arises in our mind, and we think that either I'm in danger or I've done nothing wrong. That person accuses me, they blame me for something they haven't done, and so forth. So there's this strong sense of self that arises in our mind at that point. And with a strong sense of self, we try to identify how it appears to our mind. It appears to our mind as if there's this core thing, which is who I am in actuality. This is the real me. This is the real me that exists independently. It has always been there. It will always be there. It takes us sometimes to look at that sense of self that arises in our mind, because it often, when you start to look at it, it seems that it doesn't have like a really defined shape. We know that there is the feeling of I, there is the feeling of me, there is that core or heavy load that sometimes either appears in the chest, or sometimes it could appear also in other parts of the body, sometimes more in the head area, sometimes more in the lower parts of the body. So there's that strong sense of self and me that appears somewhere. But if we try to find it and start to, for example, examine inside the body, can we find that core of self, that core of me that exists in it? Can I find it in my head? Can I find it in the chest? Can I find it in my belly? Is it in the arms? And is it in the fingers? Is it in the internal organs? Is me, am I my brain? Am I my heart? Am I my blood? Am I my skeleton? Am I my frame? When we look for this core sense of self that strongly appeals to our mind, particularly in those extreme situations, we say that it's quite baffling. It's quite confusing, because cannot really find that's something that appears so strongly in those situations. Cannot find it in any physical or visual form. It's just not there. Just cannot be pinned down. And also, if we look for I or me within my mind, I mean, of course, it's kind of quite easy to see that I'm not my body. To begin with the language that we use, right? So we don't say, I am my body. It's not that we say when we use conversational language, it's not that we say, my body is going now to the cafe. My body is now going to have lunch. My body is now driving in the car. We say that I'm going to have lunch. I'm going to the cafe. I'm now driving a car. I'm using my body to do all those different things, but I'm not my body. This is my head. This is my liver. These are my lungs. These are my kidneys and so forth. These are mine. They're not I. So I am not my body. The body belongs to me, but I'm not my body. But we have a tendency to identify with our mind, with qualities of our mind. Like, I'm an angry person. I'm a compassionate person. I'm a smart person. I'm not that smart. So maybe I am found within my mind. But is there any state of mind that can be closely identified as the real I or me? It is true that we have different states of mind. We sometimes have anger, we sometimes have love, we sometimes have hostility, we sometimes have patience, we sometimes have attachment, we sometimes have generosity, we sometimes are miserly, sometimes we kind of feel that we can give, we can give to others whatever we have. So we have different states of mind, some of them positive states of mind, some of them negative states of mind. Can any one of them individually be identified as the real me? This is the core of being, the person that makes me who I am. So we cannot find that strong sense of self that we have within different parts of the mind. We cannot find it within the body. We cannot find it within the mind. I still exist. It's not that I do not exist at all. If I look for myself, I cannot find it, but I still exist. It's quite a weird sensation to recognize that, if I look for something, I cannot pin it down, but if I don't look for it, it still exists. Anyway, the whole point in that analysis and investigation is to recognize that there is a certain level of ignorance that believes that things exist independently, in and of themselves, as if there is a core of things that define things, that make things what they are. And that core of things, that essence, exists independently in and of itself. And so, based upon that ignorance of grasping at a self, all other afflictive states of mind arise and grow. And so, for example, we can see that in the relationships that we have with others. So it might be that one day we fall in love with another person. I guess that probably for most people, the falling in love part doesn't happen all of a sudden. We like to think of love from first sight. It happens. But I guess that for most of us, it doesn't happen like that. It is likely that for most of us, when we fall in love with another person, then first of all, we become acquainted with that person, then we start hanging out with that person. And the more we hang out with that person, kind of the stronger the feeling that we have towards that person. So I guess that for most of us, this falling in love part happens gradually. Till the point where we have that idea that the person is the most wonderful person to have ever met. And only if I have a relationship with that person, that would make me happy, that would make my life happier, that would make me whole as a person. That is the second part of me. Together we kind of make a complete, perfect unit and so forth. And it's all good if that happens, but we can also recognize how ignorance and other afflictive states of mind play a role in the way that we perceive ourselves, and the other person in that relationship. So first of all, ignorance operates. We don't choose to operate with ignorance. Ignorance is like something that completely permeates currently every consciousness that we have, positive or negative. So things appear to us as if they have this independent existence, and we believe in that. As if there's in each and everything, there's a core and essence that makes it what it is. And so in the first instance, we have, for example, if I look at Ruby, for example, I see a person that appears to my mind as if they exist completely independently in and of themselves, objectively. Ruby is there. There is an essence of Ruby, a core of Ruby, that is what makes her be who she is, and it's over there, without my mind making it up. And so, first of all, there is an appearance of something existing independently, objectively. Then ignorance believes in that, conceiving of the person to exist independently. And then in the next step, there's what we call an incorrect mental attention. An incorrect mental attention is following on from ignorance. It starts exaggerating positive qualities or exaggerating negative qualities. So if I have good relationships with Ruby, it is likely that I will exaggerate positive qualities. And ourselves as human beings, we have positive qualities and negative qualities. All of us are a mixture of these things. It's not that we are completely perfect or completely evil. We have a combination of positive and negative qualities. But then with ignorance that believes in independent existence, and then the incorrect mental attention, we start exaggerating positive qualities. For example, if the person is giving you happiness, if they've given you some pleasure, you think that there's something wonderful in that person. My happiness is built in that person. So incorrect mental attention increases the volume of good qualities. It creates that fictional display as if everything wonderful that is wonderful or great is within that person. Of course, here I'm exaggerating and kind of explaining that, but this is how this mechanism works. Now, we see something that is attractive, we exaggerate the attractiveness based on seeing a certain portion of independent existence. And then the next step is desire or attachment that seeks it. It is looking for it, is seeking to come in contact with a thing that has positive qualities, happiness. My happiness is within that object. And likewise, if we start to speak of relationship, so unfortunately, it happens that we enter into a relationship, and for many people, after some time, kind of this first stage falling in love fades out, and then it becomes either just normal, which is good, but sometimes people also start disliking each other. So it happens that you enter into a relationship with someone that you thought that is wonderful, and your happiness was in that person. And then later on, things did not go well, and bit by bit, that person started to either irritate you, disappoint you, and a mind that then starts to exaggerate the negative qualities kicks in, to the point where it might be that the person that was a wonderful person a few days ago, a few years ago, now becomes the worst person that you could ever think of. So again, it's all based on ignorance that believes that there is this core of being, an essence of something that exists independently, and then an incorrect mental attention that increases the volume of negative qualities. And when anger, hatred, animosity, resentment, belligerence, and so forth, when all those mental processes occur, they come along with a certain intention to harm, to damage, to undermine, and so forth. It's not that we become necessarily completely crazy or livid, infuriated, and so forth. But there's the process of ignorance, incorrect mental intention that superimposes, exaggerates negative qualities, and we cannot stand that object anymore. We want to either completely break apart from that object, or we want to harm it. And so our afflictive states of mind are based on ignorance of grasping at a self. This is how we call it, but what it means is grasping at independent existence. And as such, when we look at this chart, we have ignorance of grasping at a self. And we divide it into, in Buddhist terminology, we divide it into two types: grasping at the self of persons and grasping at the self of phenomena. But actually, before we continue with that, how are we doing so far? Is it overly complicated? Is it okay? Any questions? All right. And so ignorance of grasping at the self, we divide it into two types: grasping at the self of persons and grasping at the self of phenomena. So what's the goal with that? Everything that exists is called phenomena. But still, we can divide phenomena into living beings and things which are not living. This is, you can say, a rough, or I don't know if it's an arbitrary way of dividing everything that exists, but this is what we do. We have living beings, persons, and phenomena, which is actually also kind of quite a little bit confusing. In English, a person is a human being, isn't it? In Buddhist philosophy, every living being is a person. A dog is a person. A koala is a person. That's pretty cute, isn't it? A fish is a person. A bird is a person. Pretty weird. Anyway, everything that is living, a living being, everything that has a consciousness is a person, regardless of their species. And all other things which do not have a mind, do not have a consciousness, are phenomena other than persons. So we have ignorance with respect to things which are not living beings, and ignorance with respect to things which are living beings. So far we spoke of, I illustrated how we have that idea that as persons or as people, that there's something inherently independently that exists within us, that is what making us be who we are. But also we have a similar type of ignorance that operates with respect to other things. Like, for example, when we think of the things that we want to have in our life, when we think of our possessions, for example, a house and cars and appliances and food and so forth, all of them also come with ignorance that operates on them with the same type of trust in their existing independently. We think that our happiness is found within our houses, our cars, our appliances, cup of coffee, piece of cake, delicious food, and so forth. We have that idea that there's an independent exist, that those things exist independently. They're giving us happiness and well-being independently from the on-side. And in a similar way, if we look for them within the physical makeup, at least, the different parts, the atoms, the molecules, and so forth, we're not going to be able to find all those qualities that we ascribe to them, that we chase with our mind. Or there are things that annoy us, things that we dislike. No, I really dislike hot weather. Also, hot weather doesn't exist independently. I mean, it's kind of weird to try to dissect hot weather, a hot day, and to try to find kind of the essence of heat within a hot day. I mean, where is that essence of heat? Is it in my body? Is it outside? Is it in the air? Is it in the soil? Where is that heat within a hot day? Can I really pin it down to something that is tangible? I mean, just a thought. But anyway, we have that idea that things exist out there independently, and we ascribe qualities to them, and we exaggerate them, either positive qualities or negative qualities, and then we like them or dislike. We chase after them or want to be away with them. We want to help, support, and increase them, or want to completely eliminate them. And so there are things that are not living beings. We call them phenomena, and ignorance thinks that they exist in and of themselves independently by their own power. And we have living beings, which, again, ignorance thinks that they exist independently. And so ignorance of grasping the self, as I said, is divided into grasping the self of persons and grasping the self of phenomena. And we're almost done with that division. There is one more division to go through, which is a division of grasping the self of persons. So grasping at the self of person is divided into two types. Grasping at the self of person that is another person, and something that is called by this really obscure term, the view of the Persian collection. Basically, what it means is that I have my own self-image, image of myself as if I exist independently. And also when I see each and every one of you, there is an appearance as if you exist independently, and then my ignorance is completely adhering to that and operates in a particular way. So grasping at a self of person, grasping at a self of persons that is another person, like for example, you, and the view of the Persian collection, grasping at a self of person that is oneself, that is me. Now, you might wonder, why do we need to split all these theological hairs? I mean, why do we need to go through all those classifications? Well, we need to go through all those classifications, first off, because it's fun, or at least, some people get a kick out of it. But the second reason is that when the Buddha spoke of what is the most fundamental ignorance that keeps us going in cyclic existence, he said that the most fundamental one is ignorance with respect to ourselves, the view of the Persian collection. So, of course, everything that we're confused about, everything that we're ignorant about is a problem. But the most fundamental one is ignorance with respect to ourselves, in a sense that we don't know who we are in an actual sense. We have a fabricated idea of who we are. We reify it. We kind of make it concrete. We think that it is stable. We think that there's kind of a core of myself that has always been there, that will always be there. It is unchanging, independent, indivisible, and so forth. And all of the problems that we experience is based upon this distorted notion of ourselves. This is what the Buddha said. And the good news is that there is something that we can do about it. What we can do about it is to understand who we are in reality. So to understand who we are in reality is to develop wisdom. And so if I look at the second point that we have covered in the text that Geshe-la has been teaching, well, first of all, the section in the text that explains how to develop wisdom, the ultimate bodhicitta, is speaking very succinctly about recognizing what ignorance is. So we spoke so far about ignorance that distorts reality, but particularly ignorance that believes in independent existence. And then the text there's one paragraph that is found, one or two paragraphs found in page 118 in the book, that explains the innate view of the Persian collection. This is the root of cyclic existence. And this is the belief that I and mine exist independently. There is a real sense of I and mine. This is the very root of samsara. And then the text explains the way to eliminate ignorance. The way to eliminate ignorance, the text says, is to understand selflessness. So we used two terms in Buddhist philosophy: selflessness and emptiness. For the sake of our discussion, they mean the same thing. Of course, when you look at that in greater details, then there are some distinctions that are being made. But for the sake of our discussion now, selflessness and emptiness mean the same thing. So a goal is to eliminate ignorance. Ignorance is grasping at the self. To eliminate ignorance, what I need to understand is that what ignorance makes of, what ignorance fantasizes, imagines, and so forth, that doesn't exist. This is what it means to realize selflessness. So rather than kind of thinking that it's acting in a way that is not selfish, it just means that it is a disbelief in ignorance, not just a vague sense of disbelief in ignorance. It's about developing an understanding that what ignorance conceives of is untrue. It is not real. It is fabricated. And the way to do that is to analyze what ignorance does, to analyze the objects of ignorance, and to come to the conclusion that things do not exist in the way that they appear to us. Things do not exist in the way that ignorance is conceiving of them. And so, for example, if I just illustrate it with an analogy, you have someone is baking a cake, and instead of using sugar, they will use salt. They will pour heaps of salt into that cake. And when you see that cake, you have that idea that there is some sweetness, inherent sweetness in that cake. And you want to kind of scoop a spoon of that cake and experience that delicious flavor of that cake. But as soon as you do that, you get this shock of kind of having your mouth is completely filled with unexpected saltiness. So you can say that you have a realization that this cake, which you thought is sweet, in actual fact, it's not sweet. It's not sweet. You thought that it is delicious. In an actual fact, it's revolting. It's not very delicious. It's revolting. And so a similar thing you can say is happening with ignorance. We first of all identify what ignorance conceives of. Conceives of things exist independently. But we try to look for things and identify that independent existence. Can it be found? And as I said, like, for example, with respect to myself, when I'm being frightened, when I'm being elated, when I'm kind of being irritated, when I have jealousy, when I have pride, when I have attachment, there's a strong sense of self that arises in our mind. And when I try to, it comes with that feeling as if there's this core of myself, the real I, the real me that is found here within this package of body and mind. So if it exists like that, I have to find it. If it can be found, it can only be found in the body and mind. It cannot be found anywhere else. So if I look for that independent self in my body and mind, and it cannot be found anywhere, the only conclusion that I can come to is that an independent self doesn't exist. It's not that I do not exist at all, but an independent I does not exist. An objective, a true, or an inherent I doesn't exist. And so the way to dispel ignorance is to look for what ignorance conceives of and see if we can find it. Not only to see if we can find it, but also then to understand that things exist in a way that is opposite to the way that ignorance conceives of. Like, for example, with respect to me, while ignorance conceives of myself, it believes in me as existing independently, as if there is this core sense of being that is me, myself. I can understand that, for example, I exist not independently, but solely depending upon others. Like, for example, as a person that I am today, I am dependent upon the person that I was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. the person that I was during my youth. All those different things contributed to the person that I am now. So there is no inherent and independent sense of self that has always been like that and will always be like that. But actually, I'm a person in a process of evolution or declination. You know, evolution or declination, they happen at the same time, isn't it? And so this is one level of dependency that I can understand. Also, another level of dependency is that I have different parts. It seems to my mind when I think of that core sense of myself, that essence of myself, as if it is indivisible. It doesn't have any parts, as if there is a lump of me. I mean, it's quite difficult to think of what the shape is, but when particularly when we imagine those extreme situations, like for example, falling off a cliff, and it seems that this sense of I strongly appears to my mind, it does seem as if there is this lump of me that arises in my mind that is completely indivisible. So I'm also not indivisible because I have different parts. I mean, to begin with, my body and my mind are parts of myself, and also each one of them has parts. And if I divide my body, my mind, and so forth into parts, it will never end. I mean, I can speak about coarse parts, and I can also look at subtle parts. And I can look at molecules and atoms, and so I can also look at that at subatomic levels and energy level or what have you. So I do not exist independently in an indivisible way because I have different parts. But also, a more subtle level is that I, as a person, exists as only being labeled as I or me depends upon my body and mind. I'm being merely imputed. This is how we call it in Buddhist terminology. I am merely imputed. It doesn't mean that I am a name. Like, for example, as I said, my name as a monk is Kartsön, or Yaki before ordination. Still, many people still call me by that name. So Yaki is not just a name. It's not a label. I'm a person. But Yaki or Kartsön is the person that is only labeled on the basis of body and mind. And if I look for Kartsön, for Yaki, in the body and mind, there's nothing that I can find within them that is the real Kartsön or Yaki. In the same way, I call this a mug. Is it a mug or is it a cup? It's a mug. What's the difference between a mug and a cup? Mug is a little bit bigger. All right. It's more delicious. And so we call this thing a mug, right? But when we ask ourselves, where is the mug? We will point to this thing. This thing is the basis of imputing a mug. If I ask where is the mug, everyone will point to this. But is the mug here in the handle of the mug? Is it in the base of the mug? Is it in the surrounding of the mug? If I try to divide it into parts and find the mug within all those different parts, they cannot be found in it. I mean, just this part is not the mug because this is the handle of the mug. This is the bottom of the mug, is not the mug because it's just the bottom of the mug. But still, I can call it a mug. It depends upon just the whole lot, the basis of designation. So it is merely imputed as mug, but it's not found within the different elements of mug. And so I can understand that I exist not independently, but depending upon many other things, depending upon cause and conditions, depending upon different parts, and depending upon my body and mind, which I use in order to impute I or me, in order to ascribe a name, Kartsön, Yaki, or so forth. And similarly, everything that we come in contact with exists as being imputed onto a certain basis. It doesn't exist independently. It exists as something that is merely imputed by name, by language, by conception onto a particular thing. And so this is the way, looks like a bucket to me, Ollie says. It is a bucket. I guess that for an ant is a bucket. I don't know if an ant uses a language. I don't know if an ant calls it a bucket, but it all depends upon your perspective. So the way to eliminate ignorance is to understand that ignorance is mistaken with respect to the way that it apprehends reality, but also to develop an understanding of how things exist in an actual sense. And so to do so, the text says that what we need to do is to meditate on this absence of independent existence, what we call selflessness. And since we, in the chart that we looked at, we saw that there are two types of grasping at the self. There's grasping at the self of persons and the grasping at the self of phenomena. Someone might ask, what should I begin with? Should I meditate on the selfness of person first? Or should I meditate on the selfness of phenomena first? Like, what's the goal? How should I approach it in my meditation? And so the text says that first off, we should meditate on the selfness of person, that is, we are self. And there are different reasons for that. First of all, the sense of self that we have is the closest thing that we have to ourselves, we can say. This is something that we're acquainted with on a daily basis. But also, it is easier to understand how we do not independently exist because we can closely affirm that we depend upon cause and conditions, that we depend upon our body and mind. We can readily see how we depend upon other things in order to understand that we do not independently exist. And so since it is easier to realize it with respect to ourselves, text says, let's begin with that. Not only this text says, generally Buddhist tradition says that it is easier to understand how persons do not independently exist, they do not inherently exist, than to understand it with relation to other things. It's not that there is a difference of day and night between those things, but I think that the knowledge, the understanding of the absence of independent existence of ourselves is more approachable. Therefore, this is where we begin. But also in Buddhist philosophy, it is said that this distorted idea of ourself, not knowing who we are in reality and believing that we exist inherently, this is the very root of samsara, and therefore for us, this is the most crucial thing to understand. Therefore, we begin with ourself, the understanding of ourself not existing independently, not as an established self. So I think that we haven't got to that point in the text yet, but we will soon. So what type of selflessness should I meditate on first? Selfness of persons. So then the text gives an explanation on meditating on the selfness of persons, the procedure that we use to meditate on that. And for those of you who have been to the previous couple of sessions where we read through the initial section, they were so heavily laden with really complicated terminology that not only, I think that it did the heading of most people in class, including myself, and I guess also of Geshe-la. I mean, it was really difficult, hard going. But on a positive note, the next sections of meditating on the selfness of persons and meditating on the selfness of phenomena are way more approachable. So we begin with meditating on the selfness of persons, then meditating on the selfness of phenomena. And finally, this last section of the text will explain, though persons and phenomena do not exist inherently, they still exist like an illusion. So when we understand that, when we look at that analysis and investigation by which we, first of all, we give rise to a strong sense of I or me in an extreme situation, and then we try with another part of our mind to look for that sense of self, we can see that it cannot be found. If I cannot find myself in my body and mind, does it mean that I do not exist at all? I mean, it would be quite ridiculous to think that I do not exist at all. I mean, it is likely that if you develop that idea of not existing at all and become thereby nihilistic, that you'll be diagnosed with a psychological condition or psychiatric condition, thinking that nothing exists or nothing, whatever exists. So this is not the conclusion that we get to. It's not that we do not exist at all. We still exist, but not in the way that we think of ourselves, not in the way that things appear to our mind. Currently, whatever appears to our mind appears as if it exists out there, objectively, independently. Things do not exist in this way. They exist not independently, but depending upon many other things. They exist merely by language and conceptions. And this type of realization is called the realization of illusion-like phenomena. They appear to us as if they exist inherently, objectively, from their own side, independently. They do not exist like that. They're merely imputed by language and conceptions, and therefore they're like illusion. They're not illusion, but they're similar to that. I exist, and we know that we exist. We have feelings, we have experiences, we have history. So we exist, but not in a way that we appear to our mind, not with that solid, reifying way of reifying objective existence. We exist as being merely imputed by language and conceptions. If we look for ourselves or whatever we engage with, we're not going to be able to find it within the basis of its makeup. So, how are we doing so far? Is your brain about to melt down? Maybe yes, maybe not. Any questions? All right. So I think that we can probably bring this session to an end. So Gesta will be back with us next week, and I thought that it'd be nice to go over this section of the part. What part of the mind does the imputing? I think that rather than thinking that there is one particular part of the mind doing the imputing, we can look at the mind as a package of many different things. So when we look at, for example, when we look at the topic of minds and mental factors within logic, there is main mind and there are mental factors or mental processes. Parts of the mental processes are involved with conceptual consciousnesses, like, for example, wisdom, mindfulness, concentration, discrimination, all attention, intention. All of these mental processes, mental factors, are operating side by side together with the main mind that is doing the imputing. And so maybe kind of in some sense, Chris, I think that's asking which part of the mind does the imputing is almost verging on kind of saying that, can I, if I look for an imputing mind, will I be able to find it within its basis, as if it independently exists? But also an imputing mind is doing the imputing, depends upon many other factors. It depends upon main mind, it depends upon mental factors or mental processes. If you look for the imputing part within each one of them, you're not going to be able to find it. The definition of mind is every mind has an object. I mean, so is that a definition of mind? So first of all, there are many terms that are equivalent to mind, or that are related to mind. So, and each one of them has its own definition. But basically, a consciousness necessarily has an object. The definition of consciousness is that which is clear and knowing. Doesn't really give us much to work with, does it? That which is clear and knowing. We have to kind of go deeper into what it means. But then when we classify consciousnesses, there are minds and mental factors. A mind, so first of all, any consciousness has an object, so you're correct about it. And then a mind is a consciousness that engages an object in general. The mental factors are responsible for distinguishing the different attributes of an object. So just to give you an example, I have a mental consciousness. My mental consciousness is now thinking Ruby. That mental consciousness has parts. There is mind, which engages Ruby in general without making any distinction. It is Ruby. But being able to conceive, so to think Ruby, to apprehend Ruby, is attributed to the mental processes that work together with the main mind. So the mental processes or the mental factors engage the attributes. So there is what moves the mind towards an object, what is distinguishing you from being other things. This is Ruby, this is not Yeshe. This is the person, this is not a table. There is attention that is kind of more drawn to specifics in that object. There is the coming in contact. There is the subsequent feeling that is being generated or sensation that is being generated. Then there is wisdom, there's mindfulness, there's concentration, there's trust. There could be anger, there could be attachment. So all of these are mental factors. They are responsible for the apprehension of the different attributes or the different functions of a mind that engages Ruby, but mind is that which engages the object in general. But this is a very specific discussion. In general, mind, I think that, as you said, going back to your main point, a mind has an object. It knows the object. It doesn't mean that it knows an object correctly, because you can say that ignorance also has an object, but definitely ignorance doesn't know its object correctly. Distorted. Well, a general definition of consciousness is that which is clear and knowing. And the clarity, there's two bits, clarity and cognition. Clarity and knowing have many different angles, different things that we can think of. So to begin with, let's look at, before clarity, let's look at knowing. A consciousness can be cognizant of its object. It doesn't mean that the knowledge is correct knowledge. It has the potential to know. It does not mean to say that it necessarily knows all the bits in a correct way. But also, when we look closely at the operation of consciousness, an object appears to that consciousness, and there is an appearance of that object. So consciousness at least knows the appearance. It sees the appearance. Even if the appearance is mistaken, there is something that appears to the mind. So the knowing part is knowing that appearance. Now, clear, a consciousness is that which is clear in knowing. There are different ways of explaining that. Clear can mean that it is not physical, it is not tangible. That's one close explanation. It is clear just because it is not physical, not tangible. But then another one, I think that which is probably more kind of more to the point, is that the mind has the ability to eliminate an object. And this is kind of another take on at least the Tibetan term that is used for clear. It has the Tibetan term nangwa, or salwa, sorry, has the connotation of illuminating, shedding some light on the object. A consciousness can know its object by illuminating that object. It's pretty weird to think about it like that. It doesn't kind of, because I think that we're used to think of illumination as something that happens in a very physical way. There is like a source of light, and rays of light are cast upon a certain object, and thereby it is illuminated. So the clarity aspect of the mind can also be explained in that the mind has the ability to illuminate features of an object, and thereby know the object. I mean, kind of, it's an explanation, but still it requires a lot of, I think that not only a lot of thinking and definitely further study, but also a lot of thinking and a lot of self-reflection in trying to feel, to sense that illumination part of the mind, how it illuminates an object, and thereby it's like shedding a light on it, and through that it can know the object. Yeah. All right. So thank you very much for coming along. We will leave the session here for now. And before we do so, let's dedicate all the positive potential that we have accrued together today in looking at this text. So we will use some verses of dedication that we often recite in our study program. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that is not arisen, arise and grow. And may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain till samsara ends. Savior of the snowland teachings and transmigrative beings, who makes extremely clear the path that is unification of emptiness and compassion. To the lotus holder Tenzin Gyatso I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Finally, you uphold the Sibu's moral way, who serves the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Majjuna's victorious doctrine. Who masterfully accomplished magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please live long. Thank you. By the way, since we recited a couple of prayers for the long life of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, there is a nice piece on the ABC website on the process of the next reincarnation of the Dalai Lama, the conflict between the Tibetan institution and the Chinese occupying forces. So it's just thought it's haven't read through all of it because it's pretty long, but it's very informative. The last part is the best. Okay, that's a cliffhanger because I haven't got to that yet. Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you. All right. Enjoy the rest of the day. And see you soon. Thank you.